welcome to the Freedom of Art. The Freedom of Art is a forum for artists, art educators, art therapists, students, and hobbyists to discuss the meaning and the contribution of the arts to our world. My name is Dr. Ericha Scott. I'm a registered art therapist, and I am the producer and the host for this show. I would like to introduce my guest tonight, Diane Meyer. Diane is a watercolor artist, a hospital administrator, and a graduate student in counseling psychology. On March 27th, just a few weeks ago, she had an opening at the Davis Dominguez Gallery. I invited Diane to join us today on the Freedom of Art so that she could tell us how and why she became an artist and why she enjoys painting in watercolors. So Diane, can you tell us how and why you became an artist?
I came to Arizona to study drama and wanted to be a dancer and an actress, and found that the actual performing in front of an audience was much too revealing and too harsh. And through my coursework, discovered that I really enjoyed setting up a still life and painting. Most of it was started with theater, graphics, and what I especially liked was being able to make my artwork in private and then showing it later, so that my process could take place in a very private space.
And this private process, do you think that has something to do with who you are as a person? For some people, they like to be on stage. And so tell me about that. How is it that this works for you, this private process?
Because the artwork is so personal and is so about my internal world, it really isn't in the making of it about anybody else. And I found that having other people in the studio or in my space where I'm working really inhibited the process. So yes, I'm probably a little bit shy in that respect, and a little bit inhibited, but in just that corner of my life.
Okay, all right. So how do you, is it that you have a relationship with the canvas and the paints, or rapport? Is this part of this process that you're talking about?
Yes, it really starts out with facing a blank page and imagining all the possibilities. And that sounds a little cliche, but it really is about that. And I think I've actually gone through the motions of blocking out, taking my hands on the blank paper and in my mind saying where everything is going to go. And that's how the conversation starts. And it's almost as if after I put my hand on it, it materializes that way.
Okay, all right. Why don't we show one of your images?
Okay.
Belle, could we show one of Diane's first watercolors on top of the pile of artwork we have stacked in the back? And let me ask you this: why watercolor? I mean, you seem to love that medium. What is it about watercolor that you love?
Watercolor was very practical in that it was, there was no waste. If you can re-wet it, it was a mutable, in my opinion, a mutable medium. It can change. It isn't toxic. That's upside down.
It is upside down. Belle, that one, but it's reproducing well, which is good. So there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
It has so much potential in that you can use it with a light touch, or you can really, really put it on heavily. For me, it's an easy medium to distract the viewer, to correct mistakes, although people will argue with that. But I just really love the medium because of that. Because also there are some properties that are pretty fascinating in that you are essentially taking a thought form and building it out of water, and you're building it on paper and using not only water but the time that it takes for the water to change and dry and set into the paper. So one of the things that is mutable about the medium is the time, and that seems very magical to me. While the water is sitting on the paper, you really have no idea how it's going to dry. So it kind of has a little life of its own. And then you have time during that little fragile space to make a change if you want to, either adding color or picking it up. And you have to take the time to wait for it. So the painting isn't just about brush to paper, it's about waiting. And I love that because it gives me a feeling that there is another presence in the making of this painting, and it's not just me, it's all of the elements.
And water is one of the elements, and
Water.
because it's mutable, then for you the whole process has a mutable quality to it.
Definitely.
So it's more, I think we said earlier when we were talking at dinner about taking a journey rather than a commute.
Exactly.
You don't always know exactly where you're going.
Right.
That's exciting.
It is. It's very exciting. And I think when I first started to paint, I know there was a day where things began to really click, and I made this painting and fell asleep afterwards, and when I woke up, I looked at the painting and I didn't really know who made it. It was something that had just happened. It had happened while I was in this almost unconscious state, or just a different consciousness, say, and I was so surprised that I thought that maybe I was under a spell, and I got a little scared, like, oh, this can go away as quickly as it came. Perhaps tomorrow when I wake up I won't be able to paint at all. And so I had to do a little work on that one, and soon discovered that it wasn't going to leave me, that it was really something I could trust and put my faith into.
That's
So,
beautiful.
thanks.
And even very famous artists have had insecurities. Cezanne, it's hard to imagine that Cezanne had a doubt ever, but he
Yeah.
was actually very insecure on occasion. And even Giacometti, some of our very famous artists struggled with that confidence
Yeah.
of creating from nothing. So that's
And if you really truly feel that the painting can take on a life of its own, then there is that bit of fear that perhaps things won't go my way all the time. And that gets to be scary. Although I think at this point in my career, I know it's there and I deal with it, and it's actually a welcome guest in the studio. You know,
the unknown is the
yes.
welcome guest.
In fact, I try to encourage it as much as possible now.
Oh my gosh. So there's an element of courage
Exactly.
in painting on the blank canvas. Okay, so let's bring back the image that was on the screen earlier. And could you tell us something about the size and the title of this painting? This is, whoops, there we go. Okay, there we go. And so this, if I remember correctly, the original is really quite large.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the exact measurements. They're about 36 inches wide and about 45 inches high, that piece, although some of them are 40 by 60. And this piece was using familiar elements that I've painted before, but it is the beginning of my moon series. And the moon is in a box, a protected box. It's the moon at night. And the rest of the painting is all about a familiar walk, a familiar journey for me, in that the elements I painted before, and it's as if I was painting an apple to get warmed up. It's like playing the scales before you can play jazz. It's a warm-up for me. And
A bit like playing the scales by Chopin, though. I mean, really, this is quite a skilled painting.
Rendering things is easy for me. It's actually breaking out of that and being a little creative and not afraid to have a rough edge. That's really difficult. So the type paintings are a sign for me that I'm just getting warmed up.
Okay, all right. So, so let's look at another. Let's look at your next image.
Okay.
And it seems that there was something different in this next image. You broke out of your traditional habit,
Yeah.
or explored a little bit here.
I did, and I think visiting my own station, as I was in the other painting, gets a little bit boring, in that I know that I kind of know the answers to my own questions. So in this piece, I set up a deliberate discomfort in that I explored techniques that weren't familiar to me, that I didn't use in my process, such as the use of salt and some gimmicky things that people use, some sumi-e, some Japanese brushwork. I'm using the Japanese woodcut imagery in the background because I feel that accessing the paintings or copying the paintings of masters that have a very different process will lead me to different streams of thought. And so this painting was very uncomfortable. There are some rough edges if you look at it closely. It's a really large piece. It's about 40 by 60. And
so this is over 3 feet by almost 5 feet?
5 feet,
Okay.
yes. And
it's a large watercolor.
Large. And of course it is personal in that there are some moon symbols in it, and also a female, an old female protecting a child. So what happened in this painting is that I found that my creativity really expanded. And so it got me out of this fear mode where I was really afraid to kind of improvise a little bit. It got me improvising. And the next few pieces took off from there.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. Well, let's show a next piece.
Okay.
Because I think this is exciting, the momentum of exploring, breaking out of your box, and trying something different. Now, while we're waiting for oh, here we go. So tell us about this piece here. And it does look a little bit more abstract or free. Tell me about it. Tell me the difference.
She is another Japanese woodcut, and I need to say that the difference in the Eastern art is that painters from that part of the world dedicated their artistic goals to a collective kind of consciousness, in that they wanted to paint like the master, whereas over on this side of the world, in Western world, the goal is to be an individual and to be unique. So that put me in the mindset of another kind of mentality. She's painting this woman forced me to still use some of the uncomfortable techniques. Still about the moon. She has the moon on her chest, and she has the moon in the bubble by her head, which is kind of like a dream or a vision that she's having.
And for our guests, let me say, if you look behind the flowers, you can see up above a face of a Japanese woman, and you can see her kimono behind the flowers. She's bending over a little bit. Is she looking out the window, or?
Yes.
Okay.
She's looking out the window, and so this piece was still along that same journey of still using some techniques that weren't comfortable and familiar, and it was still taking me along in my moon series.
Okay. And so in this image, the moon represented a dream. Is that what it represents in your whole series, or does it have different meanings?
The moon has a lot of different meanings for me, but it is the mysterious side of things. It's the moon reflecting you back to you. It is a little bit about looking in and seeing yourself. The moon is about feminine issues. It is about certain things that I seem to be very concerned with at this point in my life. Femininity and female friends and female relationships and my own change of life. And so all of these concerns seem very highlighted lately, and that's why I think the subject matter really was fascinating to me.
To weaving this into your paintings. And also, the guests may not know that many of our famous impressionists used or were inspired by Japanese woodcuts. Isn't that the case? Or
Well, I know that Whistler, there were many that have been inspired by Japanese woodcuts, and
do you think the part of that was the spatial relationships that they were recognizing that there was something?
there's a certain flatness to the space. There's a certain straightforwardness about what's being said. I'm not quite sure what the attraction was for each one of them, or all of them. And for me, it really did force me to deal with the space differently because of the there was the flatness. There was a difference in the color. There are shadows rounding everything. It's a definite way of expressing oneself.
A different way of seeing.
A different way of seeing, for sure.
Okay. And I just would like to repeat this because I thought it was interesting. And their way of seeing is more from a collective view versus our Western way of the very individualistic.
Yeah.
Did you feel that influence as you were copying or mimicking the Japanese woodcut style?
Completely. I think when you speak an artist's language visually, I say speak, but it's not speak, you learn to communicate in the same way. There's something very similar between all artists. And then with the Japanese woodcuts, suddenly I felt much more expanded. I felt my creativity just really grow.
How does that feel inside?
It was great. I felt, what was funny is that these paintings went really quickly. They went a lot quicker than any paintings I did before, and they were very easy and immediate. And it was as if I accessed something that was much easier to read. And so I don't know what that means, but it was very fun.
If you were talking to a person who was saying, I would like to study painting, but I'm scared, and I would say, Diane, tell them what art has meant to you in your life. What has it brought to your life more than just making very beautiful paintings, which is a lot already? But how would you speak to someone who's never painted before? What would you tell them about what art has brought to your life? What benefits, what contribution has it made?
Painting has given me a way to access my internal world and to go to a place that was completely safe and free, where my thoughts and ideas were safe and free, and that the rules were made by me, and I made that world. So it was a place where no one could attack me, or no one could encroach on the boundaries that I set. It was also a way for me to see my own individuality and uniqueness, where in other corners of my life I didn't feel entitled to those things. So the art was this sanctuary for me, and I would tell anybody who is going into art or beginning painting to make it that and stay with that, and then just keep doing it, because the more you get to access those things, the more authentic your art becomes and the better it gets. That's what it is.
That's wonderful. let's show one last image, okay? So this one's a good one. This is a good one to end with. So tell us about this one.
This piece, I think I was completely, I would say, altered, in an altered consciousness when I did it, because it was so much like when a child is spinning around in a playground and then just falling over and not knowing where they would land. It was a painting that I truly intuitively painted, and it revealed itself to me along in the process. There were times when I didn't really know which direction it was going to take, and it was the most exciting piece. I think at the point after doing the past two pieces where I was really so uncomfortable, at this point I was feeling very comfortable with free falling, and so it was the most complicated piece I'd ever done, and I'm the happiest with it.
And I wish the guests could see a detail. I don't think we have the capability to do that because her paintings are so large that there are many subtle details and strokes that really can't be well reproduced on the show here, but they're exquisite. Oh, well, here, that shows. That's very nice. Thank you, Belle. That's a great job. And it begins to show about the subtleties of shadowing and color and shifts in detail. It's beautiful. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, so I'm trying to think of a way to ask you one last question before we close tonight. And you've alluded to it several times, but you've alluded to, well, we've talked about the journey, about letting the mutable quality of the painting have its own life. And earlier tonight, while we were eating dinner, you mentioned something about the source. So could you speak to that just a little bit about, I think that there's a relationship between all those things of being willing to let go and spin and fall down and not know where you're landing.
What is the source? I'm not quite sure. Sometimes I've thought that it was as I said earlier, I thought it was magic when I first started to paint. I think it is really being able to access my higher self with a clear vision, being able to reach a state of clarity. I think the source of my inspiration really, if you want to look at the source of my creative energy or the source of my inspiration, I think that's two different things. But I would say that a lot of it has to do with just clarity.
Clarity. That's a lovely place to end. It just seems like we just started the show. I'm sorry this is the end of our show. It's been delightful to have you as a guest.
Thank you,
And
Ericha.
hopefully maybe next year when you have more paintings, we can have you back
Oh, definitely.
to show us more paintings. I would like to thank our guest, and please join us in 2 weeks. We'll have Leah Berger as a guest who will be talking about green arts therapy. So please tune in 2 weeks to Green Arts Therapy.